That's where we're going.
Okay.
So we started now, have we?
Yeah.
Lovely. Hello and welcome to this video. And with me today, I have Tim Brennan, who has driven all the way down from Manchester to have a chat. So it's another live chat in the room. I've also got Rob on the camera, so you'll have some camera movement. It's all posh today. It's all aesthetically very pleasing. And that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about creativity and aesthetics. And we're going to be having a chat about whether creativity is a little bit under threat culturally at the moment. So why would I have Tim here to talk about such a thing? Does he know anything about it? So Tim, can you introduce yourself? Just say what your background is.
Yeah. So I'm an artist, and I've been involved in art education as well, in parallel to being an artist. And I've been showing work since the mid-1980s, and I've been teaching in what we might call for now art schools since 1992, so from the early 1990s. And I've worked internationally as well. So.
How would you describe the sort of art you do? Do you
Well,
paint pets, dogs and cats or anything like that? Because there's a big market for that, I've been told.
Yeah, that's what I did. No, I work in lots of different areas, so I'm not restricted to one kind of way of making. Okay, so and often it blurs the boundaries between areas, and I guess the thread that runs through it is, and get ready, is performance, really. So I was part of that kind of wave of art students in the 80s that were, and obviously before, but students very much so in the 80s, that would be thinking beyond the object and making actions in galleries, and in fact bringing their drum kits into the fine art studio.
Could you explain that a little bit more? Because this is very relevant, because I've been doing a set series of educational videos, and I'm trying to actually focus on the creative, performative aspects of making music.
Yeah.
So this is the idea that all music making is basically it's going out into the world and going, I like that sound, I have found this sound. And actually the action of finding sounds can be part of the art process. And this comes back to my sort of art training in the old days, to think in those ways. A lot of musicians don't think of that. But can you explain the idea of behind this?
So if I try and kind of, and I'll try and simplify it a little bit as well, and be as clear as I can. So if we think of an art school, we might think of sculpture and painting, drawing and maybe video, you know, and there's an outcome, right? That's a word that's used now. There's an outcome, which is the object, which, you know, we might think it goes in an art gallery. Well, certainly from the late 60s onwards, there was a kind of progressive attitude amongst artists, many artists, to try and break out of the kind of convention of having to arrive at a fixed object or a fixed identifiable object. So my work, which was influenced by those artists and I was taught by them, was thinking about what is there before and after that object. Is the object a point in a process? And what would happen if you actually broke open the, I don't mean literally break it open, but break open the process and look at the whole process, so that your activity within that process, which might be a sculptural activity or it might be quite a symbolic set of actions, becomes the work itself. And so then what you're actually doing is you're attempting, you might be attempting to get closer to the idea of everyday life. So you're closing the gap between the commonly held view that art is a reified kind of subject and it's over here and it's for an elite group. You're closing the gap between that and everyday life. So doing things like a musician would do things to make music, doing things that have a kind of symbolic resonance is what I got into. That was what I got into, and I got into it on foundation course before my degree in 1984. And it's kind of stuck because it's sort of addictive as well. Once you start performing, I think, in front of other people and you get feedback, it can be very addictive. So, you know, I made a lot of performances.
The way this has influenced me is that I often think that when an artist has an idea, they try to create a composition. If they're a musician, if they're a painter, they're trying to create a painting. But usually the idea is not the object, it's the process. So artists will often go, I'm going to do this. It's a performative thing that they do. And I've been trying to draw to people's attention this, that fundamentally every piece of art from the artist's point of view is a process that they've come up with. So it might be like, I'm going to, every day when I wake up in the morning, I will take a photograph of myself. I'll do it for a whole month and I'll put all the pictures up on the thing. We'll see what it looks like. They're not thinking of the final picture. They're interested to see what it would be like, but it's actually the process that they've come up with, which that creates what I call the framework, which in painting can be the actual frame, but the frame is also metaphorical for the limits you put on experience. Now, anybody watching this and thinking this is very highfalutin and pretentious could counter by saying, so if I do the washing up today, are you saying that's a piece of art?
Yeah, they could do.
And I would say only if you think of the process of going, I am going to do the washing up today, and when I do it today, how could I make that into a piece of art? Maybe you'd film yourself. It's that framework that comes in, or maybe it's about the mindfulness with which you do the washing up. Because I think mindfulness is very closely related to the performative process of creation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes sense. So if I add to the washing up every day a little bit, and whether or not it can be a work of art or not, I think it could be a work of art. I think it has to, in a sense, it has to register as a work of art.
That's the
framework. Become right. So in some way, it has to have some external understanding that it is. So you can make it yourself and say to yourself, I've made an artwork. But in a sense, that is so privatized and also ephemeral. So it disappears in time because you're not registering it in a diary. It's not a private diary. And so in a sense, it becomes kind of, did I really need to say that to myself in the mirror? You know, what you know, kind of, where's that going? What's that for? But if one can register it somehow in the world, and it doesn't have to be in an art gallery, so it becomes declared as an art.
That's the process, isn't it? If you go, right, I'm going to do the washing up, how could I make that into art? And whatever you come up with, that process, there'll be a process that turns it into art. Now, I think this is incredibly important because I glean a couple of things from this. Firstly, if you're a musician, because musicians think different to artists, but they are artists, they are creative people. Yeah. If you're a musician, you need to put it out there. Yeah. What we're talking about is it needs to go out there. It doesn't matter how it goes out there. You know, somebody could say, what I'm going to do is photograph myself doing the washing up. I'm going to put it in an envelope and I'm going to seal it and I'm going to put them all around the town. And then people go, what's this and that? And then as soon as that's the process that turns. Yeah. And you think, well, what does that mean? You know, what will people think? And that makes you start to see how the art relates. So I think that's a very important thing because it shows that if you call yourself a creative person, the first thing you've got to do is put the stuff out there, whatever, because that finishes the circle.
So when I was finishing off my degree in 1988 in Hull, we had a weird connection about Hull. We know somebody who's both there. We only found that out this morning. But anyway, my tutor said to me, probably a couple of other people as well, if you can carry on making artwork for 5 years after the course, you won't have to worry about not making the work anymore. So I set myself this, what looking back on it seems like quite an ambitious agenda of putting something out there, whether it be a performance or a photograph in an exhibition, or writing something in an art magazine, or something out there connected to the work or the work itself, once a month for 5 years. So the CV that I had was building, wasn't really about the hairdressers that I worked in, or the cafe where I washed the dishes. I didn't actually put them on there. I just had these works and where they were, or artist newsletter, wrote an article for that, and I would take every single opportunity to get something out there. So it kind of links with what you're saying.
And I think the other aspect of what you're saying, which is very interesting, is that actually, although art can be very skillful and it can be very intellectual, it can be anything you want, but at fundamental level, it's about us engaging in the world. It's about not being up here. You have to go out and do something in the world, and then you can put a framework around it. And I think that's very liberating for people once they realise they can do that and they're allowed to do that.
Yeah.
This is not a highfalutin conceptual art thing that only the intelligentsia.
No.
It's basically saying, you can do whatever you want. And if you just want to paint cats and dogs very badly, that as long as you put the framework and you put in an exhibition, that will suddenly transform that into a situation where people might go, I really actually like this. And them liking it isn't something that you should be interested in or think you own. And I think this is very liberating. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk about all this is because my experiences recently, I have seen that ability to be creative, I believe, is out in a lot more people in the world than we think. There's a lot of people, not everybody, but there's a lot of people who have a need to do that. And it's like they're aesthetic problem solvers and they need something to get their brain onto. They need something to experience. They need to engage in the world in a certain way. I think if you don't do that, it causes all sorts of mental health issues. I think you can see how the lack of being able to control your creativity, because it's like an untamed beast. Anybody who has this knows it's like a beast that you deal with. And I have felt and said on my channel a number of times, I think the ability to nurture that in our education system is slowly being undone. And I think that's where there was resonance with you on that. So you thought, so you come all the way down to Manchester basically because you feel the same way. So can you describe your view of this from the art side of you? I've come at it from the music side of you, but from the art side of it.
So I'll just go back a little bit in order to tie up something there. So the other interesting performance for me, not within a music context and not within a theatre context, but within a fine art, contemporary art context, was that the people who were there watching what I was doing wouldn't necessarily be called an audience. They might start to self-consciously form themselves as an audience, but what I became really interested in was how can they be how can the idea of the audience, that authority that the performer has, how between that and the audience, how can that be broken open? And it seemed to me, or how can it be dissolved so that they are witnessing something as opposed to being audiences? And then they might actually start to participate, and the authority might go from me to them and back to me again, and something that could not be pre-designed or predetermined will then probably happen, and that not knowing what is going to happen became really important for me. So I'd arrived with a kind of skeletal idea of, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, but I'm going to be very kind of approachable with people so they feel comfortable enough to, in a sense, become part of it. And that to me is really important in teaching, because rather than having all of this kind of information as a teacher in a bucket and you throw it at students and hope that it's all going to stick or some of it's going to stick, if it becomes the more it becomes a dialogue, the more free-flowing the creativity between you as the teacher and the student who's already got X amounts of creativity. And you then find somewhere else together, and invariably the student goes off and finds something even more. So where does that get us? It is linked to what you were saying. I think creativity is being eroded in the education. I mean, you just have to look at not that you're all going to go and get the national curriculum document for schools, but if you do look at it, you know, science, if you add up the three sciences, they take up tens of pages. I can't remember what it is now. I think it's like 30 pages or something like that. And art is one page, but there's a bit of space at the bottom, so it's not even a page, you know. And that is really it's so strict in the UK with Ofsted, and then at a degree level with Office for Students, that things are being really kind of narrowed. And the negative impact, what's being lost, is the potential for creativity. Now, you know, a lot of people would argue that's not the case, and that look at what new technology has brought us, and games degrees and media degrees. But I think in terms of what we're talking about, the fundamentals, I think it's being pushed out, and a very programmatic and rigid approach to an idea of art in its broadest sense is there. So you get an idea of art, but you don't really get inside.
No, you don't. You don't have an experience of making art and the feeling.
Does that somewhere join up with what?
I mean, I would like to be more specific and say that I think what's crept in over the last 20 years is firstly the idea that education is about getting jobs.
Yes.
So that everything's justified is about getting jobs, and there's no talk about actually personal development and getting someone to a certain point mentally where they can go and get a normal job and they can work their way through and understand how to control these
employability.
So there's that aspect of it. The next one is the way the curriculum has changed. There's not actually any pathways through anymore. So if you show you're a great painter, it's 6 years old, you can no longer jump on that thing of doing art at school, then doing your O level, then doing your A levels, and then going to art college. That's slowly been taken away. I also feel that identity politics has brought in an absolute moral certainty, which has been pushed throughout to the schools, which means that certain things cannot be questioned. So this is why the idea of a dialogue is so dangerous. Now, the whole of Western Western philosophy, which goes into the Enlightenment thinking, all of that comes from the Greeks. And if you read your Socrates, through Plato, that is all in the form of a dialogue. When you've got a dialogue, nothing is certain. The Greek philosophy isn't someone saying
totally uncertain as to what's going to happen in our dialogue.
Yeah, this is exactly it. And I'm actually thinking, shall I push back or shall I agree? And I don't know what I'm about to do. I don't know what I'm about to say. You don't know what I'm about to say. And I also have this firm belief that when you're being creative, I think there's a dialectic. That's what the dialogue is. There's a dialectic in absolutely everything. It's the way human beings understand the world. They have to always split it down the middle. But when you're doing creative work, some people think it's in here, and some people think it's out there.
Yeah.
But it's actually the conjunction between those two things which is important. And when you go up against that conjunction, it almost appears like things come out of the ether. And I've tried to do that on this channel, and that would be what would be great on this conversation. And this is what's really difficult, is to try and get to a point where you don't know what you're talking about, and you're not just regurgitating the things you already know, but you're actually reaching out in the dark to find out, what it is. And I think with this conversation, it's got to be around this idea of the future and the fact that I think creativity is actually the most important attribute that young people will need, because we are at the end of a certain cultural epoch, and we are moving into another cultural epoch. And it's not even like the move from the 1950s to the 1960s. This is the move from, sort of farming to the industrial revolution. And so I think the idea of jobs themselves has to be, they're not going to be there. There's the jobs as we think of them, the idea of being industrious and being work to a Protestant work ethic, all the things that we have in this country. I think that is how many people do a job that's any of any use or worth now? Who makes things? Most people I talk to, you find out they're either closing things down and making money out of that. There's a lot of people doing that.
Or enforcing regulations.
Or enforcing regulations.
All sorts of levels. So, there's a lot in what you've said. So
let's look at the identity politics one, because that's the one that I am, at the moment, that is something I'm wrestling with it deeply,
So when I think I said this before we switched the camera on. When I was at art school in the 1980s,
same as me.
The students, we were all kind of politicized. So we just had the miners' strike. So there was pretty consensual. There'd be like maybe 2 people who didn't agree in the whole of the year, and you're talking at that point, you're talking about 20 people in the year, probably maybe 25. So
they were the ones who put their cardigans over their shoulders, didn't they? The pastel cardigan over their shoulder,
tied it here.
Yeah. You knew that they were going to get a job working at their dad's art
they were
restoration.
Actually few and far between at art school, and so there was this consensus that that you were on the side of the miners. And then also there was also a really interesting kind of probably second wave of kind of feminism that was there, and there was a lot of support from that across the gender. All right, and then there was a lot of support for gay rights at that time, because of the AIDS pandemic was there, and there was a lot of kind of support for that. And in art schools, there was also this kind of interest in ecology, because of some artists who had brought this to the fore in their work.
Anybody who was in art college when we were in the mid-80s, we were further ahead, weren't we? I went on the poll tax demonstrations at that time. I marched on that. I also slept in some place in Wolverhampton overnight, because they were going to shut it down, because they were going to use, I went on sort of left-wing demonstrations at the time, because we were all together, and you felt slightly different to the outside world, which was all sort of loads of money and Thatcherism, wasn't it? We were
So identity politics was there. My kind of, through hindsight, thinking it was actually really quite positive. It was really quite positive, because it was about fairness, and also probably because it was underpinned by a class politics that went right across the whole lot. And also what we had was the emergence of the British Black Art movement at that time. So there was like a lot of support for that going on as well. But still, there was this undercurrent or idea that class politics was still alive and moving through them as a thread. So they were bound together in one kind of progressive way of looking at things. We call it left way of looking at things. But over the last, what could we say, 20 years, maybe, we've seen the way in which a kind of tyranny of censorship has emerged. It would have been unknown for any artwork in our art school to be censored. It just wouldn't have happened. People might have been outraged at something, but you would have a dialogue and a debate and an argument, and people might get very angry. But to close the work down would be something that would be kind of alien.
Well, you felt that the left, the identity lot on the left in the 1980s were against things being shut down. They were saying, there's prejudice against gay people, so that's been shut down. That should be allowed to happen. They were arguing for things to be open and presented. And I think when the AIDS thing happened, suddenly the government had to talk about certain sexual practices, which they'd never done before. So there was this, and then people were arguing, you have to say this. You're going to have to send a pamphlet out to every home saying don't do, if you do certain things, make sure you're protected and blah, blah, blah. So that was a watershed as well in terms of pushing against the barriers of censorship. Because I'm a product at that time, my fundamental belief is that creativity is very, very important. I think it's 50% of human activity. I think that human beings, basically, we're here, and when we're comfortable and happy and everybody's feeling okay, it's because we have a respect for truth. That means you're going to change your mind when somebody gives you the facts. We have a respect for truth, and we have an appreciation of beauty. And I think when you say an appreciation of beauty, that does not mean stroking your chin looking at the statue of David, but it can do. But it's actually the fact
I'm
that
very conscious now because I'm doing this a lot.
Yeah,
Stop doing it. Yeah.
I think it's about that being a thing that people are able to do. So everyone will accept that in schools they should be teaching truth, but I don't think they are anymore because there's an ideology in there. So there's certain truth statements, and when I was teaching, the kids knew it as well, and they'd come in and ask you a question. What do you think about BLM? And they knew it because they knew the teacher would have to go, right, so what I'm supposed to say is this. Now, yesterday, Rob, who was filming this at the moment, very expertly, he showed me the new Chat GTP.
He was stroking his beard.
He's always stroking his beard.
I did that on purpose, yeah.
Looking at David.
I am very similar to the statue of David,
are,
but only in one area.
Anyway, right, when he was filming...
he said, have you seen the new Chat GTP? And so he gets this Chat GTP thing out, and you could talk to it. He goes, hello, how are you? What do you want to talk about? And I said, I want to talk about the ancient Egyptians, didn't I? So it goes, so what do you want to know about the ancient Egyptians? I said, what race were they? The ancient Egyptians were all sorts of different races. They were all sorts of different ethnic and all sorts of different backgrounds. Was there any white Egyptians? They were all... I said, were they Greeks? And they went, yes, they were Greek Egyptians. I said, were they white? Blah, 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 blah. Did it like this. Kept coming back to this circular thing. I said, okay, was there any black Egyptians? Yes, there were black Egyptians. Were there any white Egyptians? Same answer again. And then I said to her, you're being racist.
You told Chat GTP.
And what happened, Rob?
It apologised.
It apologised and said, yes, I've been racist because my logic my logic of what I said was so sound that ChatGTP had to change its tune and go, yes, there are white people. And because I said, you're just treating black and white people differently. You will admit there's black people because you know there, but you will not admit there's white people. And because the AI...
You broke it.
This is what I mean about truth.
The whole of ChatGPT.
Yeah, there were, in ancient Egypt, there were people that we would class today as being white, if you class Mediterranean people from Greece as being white. Mm. That is a statement of fact. Mm. The Chat GTP cannot say it. And I know that. So you go into your schools, which has been completely, ideologically captured on this stuff, and the teachers know what they can say. The respect of truth is no longer there because of that.
So for me, if the idea of teaching truth, if you like, or being involved in education of truth, it doesn't mean that there can't be multiple truths, because to have the dialogue there'll be different perspectives, but it's about where that arrives. So it becomes the area of investigation for the conversation, but it's not there because it's closed down.
And one of the things is going through that sort of postmodern framework that I was taught at art college. We were all taught, because actually postmodernism is brilliant at looking at art, the idea of who the author is. All these things are incredible ideas. Okay. Going through that and then becoming so anti it, and then more recently I'll start to realise every single philosopher, every single one is questioning this. Everyone is trying to work out what truth is, and they expect to be in a dialogue. They don't reject the dialogue. Derrida or Foucault or Marcuse or whatever it's called, any of these people, they don't reject the dialogue. They want to be in there, and they want to say, well, how can you say that's an objective truth when people have their own truth? They have a phenomenological truth. And then that conversation, and you see everybody in philosophy wants that. That's the Western democratic, and I'm not supposed to say this, you see. You know, I'm sorry for doing that. I will retract that. This is the sort of worldview of what truth is, even though philosophy was invented by the Greeks, and it's that X factor that is meant by European culture advanced, but of course European cultures, all these things that you can't talk about European, and I've just got on to one of the hottest topics, was the Egyptians, what race were the Egyptians? This is ridiculous. You know, and I know there were white Egyptians, and I know people can't say it.
It's a very narrow kind of funneling of what we can and cannot say, but more than say, what we can and cannot think.
Yeah, they've shut down the dialogue. You're not allowed to have a dialogue. People will, when you discuss people who've been captured by this ideology, they will just, what they always do is they'll always go, prove it. They will use that sort of Western, you know, logic, you know, philosophical logic, you know, what's the word, empirical approach to truth on you, and you're supposed to then arm yourself with all these things, and it undermines everything that you can talk about, because you're having to prove that red is red.
So if you have that framework and you're trying to teach a creative subject, I actually don't like the term subject, so I'll take subject, put it over there. If you're trying to teach creativity within that framework, it becomes incredibly difficult. It's hard enough as it is. It is actually rocket science already, but
totally right.
It's incredibly difficult, because the sense that learning about creativity, developing creativity, the sense that it's about an unknown landscape, to use a metaphor, that's unfolding for the student, but also for the artist or the teacher or whatever, that it's unfolding. It's kind of, you don't know what it's going to look like. If there's a very strict rubric in terms of what you can and cannot say, it becomes incredibly difficult to understand where you are, what it
Your
is,
hands are completely tied of what the creative process is.
Whether or not red is red. I mean, you know, you could spend good 10 minutes talking about, is red red, and is your version of red the same as my version of red, and all that. And that might be part of the conversation, but ultimately somebody might be very particular and say, you know, this vermilion here, which is a kind of red, a type of red, a subset of red, this works really well. Maybe it, you know, what would happen if it was over there? You can't. It becomes incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I'm not arguing. I think truth is negotiated through dialogue, and the proof of it is a sort of utilitarian idea of whether it works, if it works. And I can remember when I was at art college, I said to this teacher once, I said, what's in the end, and when we're trying to get it's good, and you're judging whether it's good, I said, what is the criteria using of whether it's any good? And he goes, well, because it works. And I remember thinking, that's an aesthetic thing. This is what we try to do. You know, when you get it right, you go, well, that's working now. Work is such a weird term to use. It's working.
But it's actually quite a common term to use for creative practitioners. So this works. I mean, I don't know, do you use that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally.
So it's exactly the same. It's like, yeah, that's working now. You know.
And so I think it's not that I think truth is fixed or objective, but I don't believe truth is entirely subjective, because it just has no point in having truth then. It's a negotiation through dialogue. And then the appreciation of beauty, that is very difficult to discuss if your outcomes are about getting a job.
Yeah.
Because how do you teach someone to say, we're going to teach you how to appreciate beauty, which will make your life so much better, because once you become aware of this, Now, this is as simple as when somebody goes, "Oh, look at the lovely trees. Have you seen how that colour's there?" And this is the performative aspect of art. And you might go, "Oh, yeah, we both noticed that now. Take a photograph of it." Well, the photograph doesn't quite capture it. I wonder if we can do. That is the
Photograph
process.
often doesn't capture
No?
it, does it? It's like you take a photograph of a brilliant sunset.
Sunset,
or a moon,
yeah, you
and
can't.
it's like, oh, it's not gonna happen. And you have to stop and go, this is it now. You know, smell the flowers, or
Yeah, you would be
smell
better
the
off.
sunset now.
You know, can you imagine how you could go, "Well, I'm going to film myself looking at it and describing it," because that might capture the experience of seeing a sunset more than just seeing a flat video of the sunset, because it's trying to capture the moment.
Yeah.
All these things, I think, are so important
Yeah.
to teach young people. And the reason I think this is because I actually think there's a huge segment of the population that err towards a sort of more creative view of the world.
Mhm.
There's very rational people, and they're very good and conscientious, and I am not that, you know. But I know those types, and I value them very much because I haven't got that. But I have gone through life looking at everything and questioning it and appreciating it, and it actually means that you're open to a lot of pain, emotional pain through that as well. I think
Okay.
because you're sensitive. I think that
Yeah.
artists tend to feel things very strongly, so that it's much easier then to communicate it. And then normal people go, "God, I feel a bit like that. You know, my mom's died, and I feel really sad." And I get that from you, but the artists see it. "Yeah, but I feel like that all day long." You know, it's like there's I think these things are so important in structuring our society. We're not aware of them, and I think at the moment they're being dismantled. And when they're dismantled, you could easily go into a non-aesthetic kind of culture, which would be any of the autocratic, you know, like Stalinist Russia, or, you know, anywhere where the art is just basically to prop up ideology.
And then the art has to go underground.
Yeah.
And I feel like, you know, that I can almost sense that could happen. If you've got this framework where it's very difficult to have a dialogue, and you're trying to develop creativity with students, but you've also got the sense that beauty, which includes an aesthetics of ugliness, that ugliness is not outside.
I actually think that's what the appreciation of beauty is.
It's part of it. It's not outside.
Yeah,
it's in it.
I must counter what I came across like. I think artists, what they're doing is they're negotiating what beauty is. So the avant-garde is often going, "You didn't think this was beautiful, but it actually is." And what you talk about that performance art and performative art, that's precisely what it's doing, isn't it? It's going, "You didn't notice there was beauty here, but there is."
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily that something looks pretty. It's not that. It's to do with the fact that there's an aesthetic appreciation of that thing.
Yeah, yeah. So if the creative process is at its best in terms of development, where it can unfold through dialogue, so unfolding into an unknown, then the more in which the education predetermines what the outcome is going to be of the student, the narrower that potential is going to get closed off as well. So if you think about our education in the late 60s, where the polytechnics are formed, in the UK, polytechnics are formed, and by about 1972, the art schools are being absorbed into the polytechnics, and everything was kind of okay. And that you can then have a degree in art in 1972, from a diploma to a degree. And then by 1992, the polytechnics are absorbed into the university system, which was a very different kind of approach or view or attitude to what education might be. Most of it was. And then you add on top of that, students in 2010 start paying fees. So it's 9,250 quid a year for a degree if you're a UK student, right? It's more if you're an overseas student. Right? And then you look inside the curriculum and you go, okay, so it's broken up into modules. So the degree course is broken up into modules, and you might do, let's say you do 6 modules a year. And each module has a descriptor that describes what it's going to set out to do. So it's got aims and overview, and then it's got what the learning outcomes are going to be in terms of skills.
A real world example
and in
of
terms
how,
of knowledge.
Yeah.
And you then overlay that with this framework of you've got to be very careful what you say, and things might get censored. It then becomes even more difficult for creativity to develop, because you're predetermining what the outcome's going to be. The student is paying, so there's an expectation that they are going to, in a sense, buy what it is that they've set out to pay for, or that they've paid for. We're in a difficult situation.
My niece is doing,
pessimistic.
my niece is doing fine art at the moment, and she said, "Can you help me with my essay?" And I looked at her, and she had a choice of 4 essays. All of them were about identity politics. Every single one. They weren't about art. They were about identity politics. There was nothing being taught about art. It was all related back to identity politics. So it was study a feminist artist, or study a black artist, or how does that? It was all this type of thing that was in there. Now, I think that what happened was, in the 60s and 70s, the 1960s was such a revolutionary period. It changed culture for the better on the whole, but also for the worse in certain little areas, but on the whole the better. And we have this sort of realization that we should go to other identity groups and listen to their voices, because they're really important, because it will make the world better. And I think that's what happened. And I think at the time then, the idea is that the arts will be funded because these are avant-garde. So if you're doing an avant-garde piece of work, then you will be funded to do that, because it can't exist in the mainstream, because this avant-garde thing is really important to hear this weird view of the world. I think in the 1980s, you had Ronald Reagan in the States and you had Thatcher. And I think the funding changed. And I think there was a conservative thing to go. We should be funding things that are of worth. So we're going to fund the Royal Ballet. They are definitely going to get some money, and the Tate Gallery. We put a load of money next to the Art Gallery. And I think that the avant-garde, who were then much more entrenched in identity politics, went, well, one thing that is really worthy is black art, lesbian art, this art and that art. And suddenly the funding goes towards that. Now, we all know that if you want to get funding for art now, you better make sure that you've got an identity politics agenda in your bid, because that is the only way you're going to get it.
Or
now.
Maybe an overtly participatory dimension to it, where you are going to benefit these different kinds of groups.
These
this is how you're going to do it.
Yeah. Now, the thing is, it sounds like I don't want to have art that's made by and it's not that at all. What it is that I don't think that agenda that used to be, this is really weird, this person wants to do this and there's no way they can do that, and I don't know what it means, but let's fund it, because it might be it's different to going, right, let's do a thing about black people in the UK and what the Rush generation suffered, and you just know that that's there.
So I set out, like I said at the beginning, to do this very ambitious thing of putting something out there once a month, in order to get them in 5 years, that my tutor had said, and then you'll be okay, And there was a little bit more money still there, even though the kind of funding process had shifted in the way, or was shifting in the way that you've just outlined. There was still a little bit of money. Artist-run spaces had a bit more money. The Arts Council, it was a lot more open as to how you could get money to try things out. You could try things out in a gallery, and then realize that you'd made a work that was actually, you didn't have to worry about whether it was finished or not. It was like, actually it is finished. I didn't know that until I put it out. But that then in the 90s, what we have is a retreat by many artists. We're talking in a UK sense here, in London, younger artists who then retreat back into into this tight gallery system with objects, and you have a kind of an emergence of Britpop at the same time. So you've got the young British artists in galleries who are now old, right? And you've got Britpop happening, which it was a kind of conservatism, really. It wasn't essentially about trying things out. It was about, that's a sculpture, you know, that's in a gallery, and it's worth a lot of money.
Yeah, and I think that has been we then go back to your original point about class. Now, I know that there is more than enough people to fuel the actual job market for creative subjects, which I think has exploded. I think this idea that we need to shut down creativity is ridiculous. We're chatting on my YouTube channel, and that's a channel that, you know, makes some money, reaches an audience. We're broadcasting in a way that you couldn't have done 10 years ago.
Yeah.
We're talking about whatever we want to talk about. There's complete freedom here. And that is expanding more and more. And I am very interested in being able to give what can I sell on here? How do I, you know, can I push certain things that I believe in? All these sorts of things happen. And so we know that we are on a revolution in terms of, we could call it media, and media is art. You know, and I've been very surprised at how deep I can get in on my channel talking about these creative things, and have a channel that's doing actually pretty well.
The use of the term media comes out of the art school.
Yeah.
It doesn't come out of some other kind of communications program.
No. The media means paint, doesn't it?
Comes out of it. So at the end of the 60s,
Yeah.
the media department at the Slade was the first media department, and it was being used in a way that was connected to art. And then, of course, here we are 40 years later, and media is seen as something that isn't directly bonded to the idea of fine art. It's not.
Or music. So this is where we come at the end of it. This is exact, because I think at the moment, art and music, it's a modernist and postmodernist idea to split these. It's a modernist idea to have painting, and then painting is then landscape painting and portraiture, and they all have a hierarchy of worth, you know, that old sort of salon idea. I've lost my thread now. So that idea of all these separate things was actually quite useful in the 20th century. I have a strong belief that the sort of real anarchic artists of the post First World War period, like Marcel Duchamp, I think they just shot fine art in the arse brilliantly, opening the world up to have cinema and rock and roll and all these other art forms that were much better. You know, that was so much better. And then the artists, you know, by the time they catch up with it, like Warhol and Robert Rauschenberg and all those people in the 60s, you know, it's like that's where it was at, because it was divided off by very clever artists of that early modernist period, you know, that sort of 1910 to 1930. They're just geniuses. They feel like, you know, they're not the Fauves, wild beasts. They're wild beasts just tearing it up. And I think now, because of the way the internet works and everything's digital and everything is spread in that way, all these things are coming back together. And I think that's what we need to. So we have to go back to creativity, because a long time ago, fine artists could work in video. You know, fine artists could have a gallery which has got sound in, which is music. The things were blurred in fine art a long time ago. The things you're talking about performative art and the audience it's pretty much TikTok. You know, anyone who's running around in front of people, you know.
Performance is now kind of a currency within mainstream culture.
I really wish
that people, saturation,
that everything that's going on on the internet and in social media, I wish people would go, all the fine artists predicted this.
The division between art and life is kind of narrowed with those first Big Brother programs, where I can remember, "God, I'm going to stay up and watch this person sleep." I mean, it's much more kind of, I think, modelled now and
Yeah.
staged in a way now. I think it is. But I can remember when that first happened, and I can't remember when it was, but it was before we all had the internet, and people would like watch people asleep,
I can remember there was an artist, and they made the longest film of all time, and it was a shot of a skyscraper that went on
That's
for
Andy Warhol, 24-hour Empire
state. Yeah, that was the one, and everyone's, oh my god, that's the most avant-garde thing. And then you get to a point where now you can go onto the internet and watch any part of the world with some fixed camera, and you can find it and sit there and watch what's going on. And you think that they were doing on. My point is that,
and I can listen to a kind of re-edit of Zeppelin's No Quarter, where the guitar solo from various kind of live recordings, where I can just really kind of just listen to this endless kind of pretty kind of amazing, but I know it's an edit. It's just
when somebody does that, and they just
edited
all
it's
this,
an amazing extended No Quarter. I'll have to send you. I'll find it. Well, you can find it.
But the point is, as everything condenses down into this one big stew, the problem is that the jobs that are there, and it's a big $1 billion, it's all there. If once you decided not to just call paintings and art gallery art, or classical music, once you get to that point, the jobs in there are being fed by the upper class educated elite. And I feel that the sort of working class, or whatever you want to call them, and no longer that their access to creativity is being slowly moved away. They're being trained to be complicit. And once you arrive at this idea of complicity, then look at our education systems. They all make sense. It's not that they've gone wrong. It's just the idea of educating people with the dialogue so they can think for themselves has been swapped by the colleges need to make you complicit.
Yes, to make you complicit, to make money, and also who runs the art school? Are they practicing artists that run the art school? They tend not to be. Who runs the university? They're not practicing artists. They might have come out of humanities. They'll probably come out of science more. And their own personal view of what art is and what this conversation might have delved into could be very, very different. Could be actually quite hostile.
Yeah, then there's no respect for the training either.
I'm not saying that people involved in humanities and people involved in science are automatically hostile, but it would be good if art schools were run by practicing artists with some support.
So what's the conclusion of all this? What needs to happen?
Oh my goodness, though. You see, if I go through what I think needs to happen, it's like, because I know it's not going to happen imminently. I think you need to get rid of the measurement in education. I think this measuring, this obsession with measurement. So experience surveys. I don't think surveys are going to really help. Recruitment targets, right?
It'll all be gone. You'll just have a patch of concrete with a Coca-Cola can just rolling by in the wind.
Yeah. The office for students. The office for students. I'll just stop there with the office of students. Ofsted. You would have to not have those things. You'd have to kind of empty out all the modules. You could have modules, but the students shouldn't be thinking of modules. The first university, was it? Yes, it was just in a university. The first teaching job I got was at Dartington College of Arts in Devon.
Well, that's the weird one in the sculpture park, isn't it? I've been down there.
And it was when I got there at the age of 25, to teach full time on this new course called Visual Performance. And they said, can you put it on the map? And I'm 25 years old, and the students are 18 and 19.
Yeah.
So really there wasn't much gap between us. I couldn't believe that this kind of art school, we're going off on a tangent, existed. It was like your stereotypical art school. It was like, my God, this is so wild.
Yeah, I spent a day in there.
It was unbelievable.
It was just very arty, wasn't
So
it?
there, yeah, and so there I was. And so my point, though, is when I got the job, they said, oh, we brought in this new framework. It's called the modular system, right? It's an American model, right? It's like, what's the modular? Because we didn't have any of that, right? What's this modular system? So, well, they do 6 modules a year, you know, and it's kind of, they're in this many weeks, and, you know, and then we assess them at the end, towards the end of the module, and then they get their marks released at the end of that. I said, what, they get marks 6 times a year? Yeah. I was like, right, okay, this is very alien to me. But anyway, so moving forward, the first module results come out, and they're in the office for the students to pick up. And I looked out the window, and there was a queue of students going around the block, queuing up to get their results. And I was thinking, we never did that. Literally only a few years before that, we never did that. And I actually think at that point, it kind of changed.
When I did my degree in art, we did have one module that we had to do. I think it was 3, but that was like the written module. And then we had to do a dissertation, but the main bit was practice. And so we did all sorts of things. We had to do a bit of sculpture, a bit of printing, and then we decided what we want to do. And then I was a painter, and so then you had to prepare for your degree show. And all we did for the last year was paint like a real painter, get all our artwork together, and then we went into the gallery and we exhibited it.
And they would mark that.
And the way ours was marked is that they hired in a heavyweight painter, more famous and more heavyweight than our lecturers, who were pretty heavyweight. Like Knight & Hoskin was pretty known, Paul Hempton, all my staff, they were in, as like we used to say, they're in the books. But they brought in this heavyweight person in, and they just walked around, looked at it, and gave you it. Because I can remember getting a call, and I missed it, and it was my tutor, and they said, can you get over to the gallery, because they don't know whether to give you a 2-1 or a 2-2. They want to chat to you about it. That's where the decision was made.
Yeah.
And it was not anyone who knew anything about
the
me.
role of that external examiner, who would have been a heavyweight artist, there would have been marks from the staff.
Yeah.
And then that external examiner would have a much closer, not just an inspection of those marks that the staff had made, but would be really looking at the work as well. And that is what
I
have your conversation.
No, I missed it because I was by the time I got there, because I wasn't in Wolverhampton at the time. I was far away, and I got the call, and I got in my car and drove all the way up there, and they'd gone, gave me a 2-2. So I thought, I could have talked myself up to a 2-1 if I got there. I was always going to talk.
Andy, you could have talked yourself. Probably could have got further. They would have been scratching.
That was in my degree show, so that's not worth a first.
Yeah, but it would have been next to other things, wouldn't it? Yeah. And how old is that now? Then when was that?
Well, that's 1989. Well, I got better paintings than that, but they've all lost. I've got a few that I've just been able to relocate, but my solution to this is this. I would, like you said, take away the numbers, the
bean counting.
Yeah, I would actually set it up so there's an audition process, so people know that it's going to be difficult to get in, and when they get in, they know that they're good. There's a bit of exclusivity there. I think that's very important, that you cut the numbers down. I wouldn't bring people in because they're brilliant artists. I would bring them in because they're motivated. You know, that sort of thing. We know this person really wants it, so that you've got something much more positive. And I would spend the taxpayers' money. I would pay for it, but I would be paying for a lot less students. But I would be paying the staff to be there. I would just put more money into it. So
would you have student fees?
No,
I wouldn't either.
But I would cut the numbers down.
Yeah,
you know, I don't think that a degree and then a master's degree, I don't think many people should be doing it. And I think the idea that you decide you're an artist and then you get to a certain point and go, I'm not actually good enough. So what do I do? They should have advice to go, well, just take your knowledge sideways and go take it somewhere else because you're not at this level. And there's no issue with failing. That's one of the things. But I think the most important thing is if you're going to employ lecturers, make sure they're actually creative, put them through a very complex process. But once you've decided they're in post, let them decide the mark. No examination, no modules. Let them work with that person, set them things that they think they need. And at the end of the 3 years, they go, I think this person. And I would think you will get an honest, realistic, that they go, this person didn't do any work at all. It's been a complete waste of space. They fail. No pushback if that happens. No pushback. And then what you will get is the truth, because you won't have ideologically captured it with all the nonsense that's there, which they think will make it better, but it won't make it better. That's what I've come out believing, is that the most honest mark, me and Rob, when we were teaching music, we could sit down, the person we've had just taught for 2 years straight, and go, that person's brilliant, they're a distinction.
But you do that through dialogue.
Yeah.
Dialogue. So it's not a case of there just being one person.
No, because you'd sit down and you'd argue the case.
So the staff would retain the authority that they'd actually earned through their years and years of hard work.
And that's why you're paying them.
And that's why you're paying them. But actually, more and more the case that the staff are actually looking over their shoulder all the time because they're being watched by people who are not rooted in art.
And I will say this to the camera when it gets round to me and my face. When I'm going to say this to now, this system that we have at the moment, I'm not saying fraud and cheating goes on. I would never say that about our educational systems, but it's conducive to fraud and cheating. It's conducive to creating a situation where the pressure on the teachers will be to err on passing, on bringing marks up, and that could well be going on in our educational establishments, especially in the arts, where the negotiation of what is good and not good is a negotiation. So once you shut that down, you're basically feeding them in, giving them the qualification, taking the money and getting them out. And it is of no use to us culturally in society. There's no use to it. There's no point in these people doing these art degrees. That's what I've come out. But there is a point in having them, and the world will be a better place. But that's got to be argued.
Yeah.
If we don't argue this and we don't sort this out, I think we are on the way to genocide and gulags. That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, we need to get over the hump of possible nuclear apocalypse first.
Or that one first. Yeah. I'd rather have the nuclear apocalypse than genocide and gulags. That's my biggest fear, is ending up in a gulag.
I'd rather have Apocalypse by Mahavishnu Orchestra.
It's their fourth album, 1974, produced by what's the name? That's going to try to be clever there. George Martin, of course, of the Beatles fame. George Martin. Yeah. Jeff Emmerich engineered that. Michael Tilson Thomas conducted the orchestra. Yes, that's what I'm here for, you see. Is that type of knowledge. They never appreciated it when he was in college. I told them all that in the interview. I said, I know who conducted Apocalypse by the Mavish Orchestra. Are you interested?
Which interview? For
my job as a music teacher. I was going in there with all this facts and knowledge, and they did not care. All they want to know is whether I knew about equal opportunities.
So it does actually come back to what we're talking about. Yeah.
Sort of.
And would you have modules? Did you say?
I just have the Mavish Orchestra. I've gone facetious. We're at the end of the video, so I always go facetious at the end of the video. I would say that all the staff have to play Birds of Fire, and the Black Page, and something funky. And if they can play all those three, then they're in. And then the kids have to learn that. And if they can play that after the end of the 2 years, they get the qual. The rest of them sling you up and go back and do your Oasis songs at home. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean...
And I think for painting, you have to paint something hard like a tree. They're really hard to paint, aren't they, trees?
Well, I actually think trees are quite good because they don't, nobody's going to know, are they, if it's what the exact tree was that you were looking at.
Do you know what I think the hardest thing to draw is with my art knowledge? You know what I think the hardest thing to draw?
Dough.
It's that's easy. I think babies are the hardest thing to draw. I think babies have a softness and a delicacy that as soon as you put pen to paper or any way, you can't quite. And when my kids were born, I'd get a piece of paper and you start drawing this thing, and it's just Winston Churchill or Phil Collins. It's just this middle-aged man. Well, how do I get this? And then you'll look at sort of Rembrandt or one of these, you know, or Dürer, and you see how they've captured it. Oh my God, how they just because it requires just you know.
Yes, Rembrandt, Dürer, genius.
They were geniuses, and it's a wonderful thing, and to be able to appreciate them, and then be able to see the link between that and doing your washing up and working out.
Well, you have to be able to try and pull out the genius quality that is in many people.
It's there. It's all that. It's there, and it's in our young people. Did you ever feel that it wasn't in the young people? You know, when you're in that class, so
I always felt that it was.
It is. It's still there, and it needs to be nurtured because they'll sort us out. When we're in the old people's home and they're wiping our asses, and we'll be totally dependent on them, and then we'll think, "Shit, I wish we hadn't touched."
If there are any old people's homes.
Yeah, they'll be the gulags, won't they? It's been brilliant chatting to you. It's lovely to have an interview face to face.
Just met each other, yeah.
And I do feel I've really enjoyed that. I like the fact that you're an art teacher, but you know about the Mahavishnu Orchestra. I like that. Now we've got to the end of the interview. I think we're going to have to get you down again, and I think I do actually know a little bit about art because I want to. It'd be nice to expand a little bit out. So any of you that like art as well as music, stick it in the comments because we can start talking about art. We were chatting about Richard Long.
We had a little.
Joseph Boyce. You're an expert on Joseph Boyce.
I'll take that. I'll have that.
Yeah. Well, you know more about him than me.
I know a bit about him. Yeah.
You know.
I never met him, but unfortunately.
So, you know, if you fancy getting an old chair and putting a big slice of
Bonham,
diagonal...
You never met Bonham, did you? But, you know,
I never met John Bonham.
People who knew Joseph Boyce, like you know Robert Plant.
Joseph Boyce, he was out of a character, wasn't he? So if you want to know about Joseph...
if you want a night out with the boys, the Joseph Boyce...
Yes.
Do something on that, yeah? That'd be good.
He was a very interesting... I'm going to look him up. He's a very interesting artist. He didn't... He in the war, he got parachuted down and got wounded.
We're doing the programme, aren't we?
Yeah.
Because there's a mythology around that. We don't know. People are not quite certain
whether he was encased in fat,
or whether or not he used that as material to create a kind of sense of his past. You know, that people could go, "Wow."
If you're interested in this conversation, we'll get you back down. And if anyone wants if they're going to tell us about so and so. I'm quite interested in these different artists.
Oh, we could do that, yeah.
That'll be a very... I realised I could open a little bit of a new aspect, which is not just music, but art. I want to get into film as well. Anyway, I'm just waffling on. Thank you all for watching the video. Rob, I'm on talking. It's me now.
I'm coming.
Yeah, it's slow though, isn't it? Very slow. What was I doing? Oh, yeah. Put a like on this because this is a much more esoteric, weird video. No one's going to want to watch this one. So put a like on it. Subscribe if you want to see more of this proper intellectual stuff and not me just going on about the 10 best crisps. Because that's what you're going to get because they get the views. If you want to join my Patreon, you can. And I won't stop you. You can become a free member or you can become a paid up member and see more stuff. So the paid up people see better stuff than the free members. It's called capitalism and it's a good thing in my book because I'm right wing. I'm not really, I'm joking because we had a conversation about this before. And if you don't want to do that, but also fill the coffers of capitalism, you can put some money into my PayPal tip jar. And if you like the fact that we've done an interview in public like this, in person, in my lovely room, this also is a charity, which is why we can do this and we're able to come and talk like this and talk about art, and that's actually quite a rare thing to be able to do. Then there's a link into the charity that supports this room as well. Tim, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. Pleasure. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. Excellent.
Thanks for coming down all the way down.